Non-Writer, where I tell stories from the avant-garde. And I've got more than a story for you today. I've got a whole book. A book about Giorgio Gomelsky, written by Francis Dumaurier. You may remember Francis from the interview I did with him about a year ago. We talked about the book and about our efforts to find a publisher for the book. Well, it turns out about a week after I published that interview, Francis did find a publisher. And this month, the book is getting published. And here it is. While working with the publisher, Francis added more stories and a lot more pictures, and a foreword written by yours truly. That's right. I was so honored to be asked to write the foreword for the book. If you've been following the Non-Writer, you know that it was basically my interest in Giorgio Gomelsky that got me started on this path to end up doing the Non-Writer. And along the way, I met Francis. And after several months of exchanging emails, I finally visited New York City, and Francis and I met in person. And that was back in 2018. We spent a wonderful summer afternoon together. He told me many Gomelsky stories. And then we started talking about his book, which at the time was only available in French. And we talked about trying to find an English publisher. The first person I thought of to help us find a publisher was a good friend of mine who's also an author. His name is Brad Schreiber. Brad's written a lot of books. One of his most recent books is Music is Power. And a few years ago, he wrote another music book called Becoming Jimi Hendrix. Brad was a big help in helping Francis get the book together to be able to submit it to publishers. And we did submit it to many publishers. Another person who played a role in getting this book published is John Sadler. John knew Giorgio Gomelsky towards the end of his life and spent a lot of time with Giorgio documenting him on film. The plan was to do a documentary about Giorgio, and John has worked on documentary films before. He started the project with Giorgio, and it went on and on for a while, and unfortunately John was never able to finish filming Giorgio for the documentary, but he did get a lot of film of Giorgio. And John was right there at the end when Giorgio passed away. In fact, John was one of Giorgio's friends that helped to clear out Giorgio's place before everything ended up in the dumpster. And John is one of the people who ended up finding a box full of tapes. Those tapes ended up being recordings of the Zoomana Festival. Between John and Dave Soldier, they were able to get those tapes made into MP3s, and you can listen to them now on the Giorgio Tribute website. You'll find the link below here, or go over to Substack. That's where I write all my stories. And you'll find lots of stories about Giorgio over on Substack. And please subscribe to my writing over at Substack. It's free, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. As it turns out, John Sadler is a subscriber to the Non-Writer. He's also a man of action. He saw my interview with Francis, and he got the publisher in touch with Francis soon after that. Thanks a lot, John. So at the end of this month, on April 30th, there's going to be the first book release party for Francis's book, Giorgio Gomelsky, For Your Love. And the book party is going to be held at the very first location where Giorgio ran a club in West London, in a town called Richmond. He called the club the Crawdaddy, and one of the first bands that he started playing there was the Rolling Stones. So yes, Giorgio Gomelsky is responsible for starting the career of the Rolling Stones. Well, of course, it didn't take long before the crowds outgrew the small club. So Giorgio had to find a bigger space. And he did that still in the town of Richmond. They moved the Crawdaddy over to the athletic club. And pretty soon the Rolling Stones left Giorgio. No problem for Giorgio. He just went out and found another band. That band happened to be the Yardbirds with Eric Clapton. Of course, Giorgio, his career was just amazing, and you'll find out all about it in the book. So many bands that he worked with. Some of the ones that really got me interested in Giorgio include John McLaughlin's first solo album, produced by Giorgio Gomelsky. He worked with the very early recordings of Soft Machine with Daevid Allen, and then of course he stayed with Daevid Allen and worked with Gong, producing some of their early LPs. He worked with Magma in France. Eventually, Giorgio, in the late 70s, he would move to New York City. In New York City, he would meet Bill Laswell, and eventually they would end up recording the very first songs by the band that Bill would end up calling Material. And of course it was Giorgio's time in New York City when he meets Francis, and they end up having a very long friendship together. And some of the best stories that I find in Francis's book aren't necessarily about these famous bands that Giorgio helped start, but it's about the time that they spent together, screwing around in New York City. It really filled in Giorgio Gomelsky as a person for me, because unfortunately I will never get to meet Giorgio. So if you're in London at the end of April, on April 30th, head on over to the book release party for Francis's book at 1Q Road. There'll be live music and lots of fun. And if you're in the New York City area in late June, there will be a second release party for the New York crowd, and I'm hoping to attend that one. Unfortunately, I can't get to London at the end of the month. So I hope you can all celebrate with me about the release of Francis Dumaurier's book on Giorgio Gomelsky, which was a long time coming. So let's have a toast to Giorgio Gomelsky and Francis Dumaurier and Brad Schreiber and John Sadler and everyone else who helped get this book out. Francis, hope to see you in New York. If it were mine to give, I'd give the stars and the sun, for I live